It's here, everyone, the time we've been waiting for. The movie claiming to be better than The Empire Strikes Back and darker than The Revenge of the Sith. I can't wait. Let's dive right into it. What went on in the trailer? Now, while there are plenty of videos on YouTube that give outlines of what each scene shows, I don't think you need clarification on this only, but rather, let's do what we must and analyze just exactly what Luke is saying, because that's the most important thing to take away from this. So the Jedi are all but dead, except for Luke and his training. The movie starts with Luke telling Rey to breathe, obviously showing her the initiation into the way of the Jedi Order, whatever's left of it. We see the pebbles rising and Luke tells her to reach out, to see her premonitions just as Yoda taught Anakin to be mindful of. So now we can already see the first opposites of the ways of thinking between the old and the new. Asking her what she sees when she says, the light, and we get a shot of Leia, and if you listen with good headphones, you'll hear Leia say something to Rey. I can't quite make it out, but it sounds like she says, I love you. I might be wrong about that. It also sounds like she's saying, you're my only hope, but sped up and scrambled. So if you heard something else, please tell me and the others below. Then Rey says the dark, and we see Kylo's mask all scrunched up and broken, which is a symbol for him breaking out of his shell and finally unleashing his true power. As it zooms into his mask, you can hear Vader breathing around the 51-second mark, which alludes to him having a similar fate to his grandfather, but ultimately being redeemed in the end. We then hear an old Obi-Wan say seduced by the dark side, or something along those lines, which goes back to Anakin and the connection to Kylo, and how he was seduced by the dark as well, this time it being by Snoke. It then goes to the scene of what looks like an almost Indiana Jones motif of the sun shining on this stack of ancient books and scrolls, and if I'm right, it's exactly what you think it is, the ancient journal of the Whills, which is what Qui-gon went searching for. The Whills were actually these godlike beings that George Lucas originally wrote as narrators of the Star Wars movies. He wrote them to be observing and watching the events of the galaxy far, far away, and seeing them as almost ants in terms of power to themselves. This idea was later abolished, obviously, but was later brought back in the Clone Wars, where we see the Whills ourselves. We then see the symbol of the original ancient Jedi Academy and the Order. We can hear Yoda during this scene, and to me it sounds like he's saying, hear me, then talks about the Force that binds us. This sounds like it could be new dialogue mixed with old, as we've heard rumors of Frank Oz, who played Yoda, returning to Skywalker Ranch for some lines. If it's new, this means that Luke communicates with his old masters through the Force, and the fact that Hayden Christensen is at Celebrations for the first time in around 10 years makes me hopeful of him returning as a Force ghost as well, which would be really cool. Rey then says the balance, which Luke energetically replies that it's so much bigger. Now, this is what I wanted to talk about. This and the ending words that Luke has to say. When he says the Force is so much bigger than just the light and the dark, he's talking along the lines of Qui-gon Jinn, who went to see the Shaman of the Whills and learned the ways of the Force, which we hear about in Rogue One. Qui-gon wasn't allowed on the council because he was far too brash and believed in following the will of the Force, letting it guide his actions just as the first Jedi had believed and written. But with the new Jedi, just before the rise of the Empire, their ways had always been worn thin, lost in the past and confused with the ideas of the Republic, the people and the politics governing the Senate. That's why it was so flawed. Luke knows this, and Yoda even knew this, as in the novelization of The Revenge of the Sith, he admits to failing to teach the ways of the old Jedi, and being too confused with the politics and the rise of the Republic, which is also why Dooku left the Order. We see Rey training with Luke, or Anakin's now altered lightsaber. We see the Rebels and First Order battling in what seems to be a representation of Hoth, but just now on red sand. We then see some giant gorilla walkers, Finn recovering from Kylo's attack, the Falcon, Rey running, and everything looks super epic when we see Kylo's scar across his face, which is on the same side as Anakin's scar over his right eye. This scene is most likely between him and Luke, which is rumored for a fight to take place between the student and the master. Then we see Luke and R2 watching what seems to be his new Jedi temple burning, and then Phasma walking out of some fire-burning wreckage with the First Order. All this comes to Luke at the entrance of a cave on Ahch-To, telling us that it's time for the Jedi to end. What does he mean by this? To my best speculation, he means that the old Jedi were no good. Just as Qui-Gon and Dooku saw, they were flawed to the extreme. Somewhere along the path, they lost their way, and now Luke had to create an entirely new order, just like he did in the expanded universe. One without limits the Jedi had, one that didn't keep the Jedi weak and vulnerable to the Sith. The Jedi were so afraid of emotion, passion, and attachment because they felt it led to the dark side, whereas that's exactly what their problem was. They had no emotions beyond serving peace and their idea of justice. He would form a new order and harness the ideologies of Qui-gon, who was much more like a gray Jedi, Anakin, who questioned attachments, and Mace Windu, who learned to harness the dark and the light, to all be his newfound teachings. The ways of the previous Jedi will and must come to an end, but the ways of the new Jedi will rise. I, for one, am unbelievably excited, and I hope this is the movie that we've all been waiting for. I hope they don't let us down with the hype. I hope you enjoyed this analysis, and stay tuned for tomorrow's episode. And if you're new here, feel free to subscribe. I'm sure all the old members of the channel will help you feel welcome in the comments. Until tomorrow, my fellow Jedi and Sith friends, remember,
the Force will be with you, always.
Now, fulfill